Their name is quite possibly the most literal tuning name for a automotive company ever. Because it is literally the name of the company and what they make that company's vehicles do. It's Mazdaspeed. Mazdaspeed's story began in the 1960s with an adventurous Mazda employee by the name Takayoshi Ohashi. I'm trying my best. And he saw the newly released Cosmo sports car and realized it had some on-track potential. So he convinced Mazda to give him 2 Cosmos and some spare parts to form a racing team called Mazda Sport Corner. Get it? Because it's Mazda sports cars going around corners? Okay. Now, the smart move for a young, up-and-coming racing team would be to do some local events, since it's a Japanese team, maybe do a Fuji endurance race, or the Japanese touring car champion, something small scale to warm yourself up. Ohashi had a different idea, and entered MSC's first ever motorsport event at the 84-hour Marathon de la Route at the Nürburgring. Think about that. 84 hours through the green hell. That's ridiculous. And the car would not be completely a stock Cosmo. Sure, it had a similar looking body and the same engine at its core, but make no mistake, it was race prepped. It had a larger grille, new power brakes, and an extended wheelbase for improved stability through the corners. And the 10A rotary engine was improved with a new intake and aluminum housing, giving it a 20 horsepower boost. Sure, it was only 130 horsepower total, but the thing weighed like 2,000 pounds. It was a go-kart. That's plenty now, and it's even more plenty back then on the Nürburgring for 84 hours straight. But more impressively than the prep for the car was the prep for the event. MSC measured the entire Nürburgring and scanned it into a computer to study the track in simulations. In 1968, the only other guys who were doing that were Ford at the 24 Hours of Le Mans with their gearbox and engine simulator. That's some high-tech stuff. And it worked. In the end, one of the Cosmos finished 4th overall, being beaten only by Porsche 911s and a Lancia Fulvia Coupe. Not bad. So with that success in the bag, MSC decided to expand their endurance racing catalog with cars like the Familia and the Mazda RX-5. In fact, a privateer run by dealership ZW Mazda from New Jersey entered the 1976 24 Hours of Daytona with a road car. I mean, they drove it from New Jersey to Daytona, put on some racing parts, won their class, and drove it back to New Jersey. Granted, it helped that, half the field was accidentally refueled with water instead of gasoline, but the RX-5 won its class first try, and that would become a bit of a trend with Mazda's newest car, the RX-7 flagship. And you knew that MSC Mazdaspeed would get their fingers all over that. In 1979, they were built up for the IMSA GTU class, and on its first try, it scored a 1-2 class finish at Daytona and won the title that year. And the year after that. And the year after that. And then the next 4 years straight. It well and truly dominated IMSA GTU. Nobody could touch that little rotary buzz box. So, naturally, they moved up to the next level of competition, the GTO class. And they finally got their new name, Mazdaspeed, after Mazda basically bought them out. And the RX-7 GTO was even more impressive. It weighed just 2,200 pounds, and the 13J rotary engine was built up to 600 horsepower from 2.6 liters of displacement. God, rotaries have bonkers statistics. And speaking of bonkers statistics, the RX-7 GTO won its class 10 times in a row starting in 1982. And it makes the RX-7 the most successful IMSA GT car of all time, with over 100 class victories. In France, things were not exactly as good as their American success. You see, back in 1983, MSC had joined the new Group C regulations at Le Mans, specifically Group C Junior, because for some reason, the FIA split up Group C and Group C Junior into two different classes. Why? I don't know. And you know what? It won its class in 1983 at Le Mans, first try, by default because it was the only one that finished. Then the FIA realized its mistake and merged Group C Junior with Group C proper, and that ended Mazda's reign at the top. It was very short, and they sort of fell into obscurity. The 727, the 737, and the 757 all competed at Le Mans through the late 1980s with no fanfare or success. In fact, it wasn't until the 767B, which itself was an evolution of the 767, finally started to change the tide. It had the same 13J engine as the RX-7 GTO that we mentioned earlier, again making 600 horsepower, but now this thing weighed just 800 kilograms, which is even lighter than the already lightweight RX-7. And in 1989, it scored Mazda's best ever Le Mans result with a 7th place overall. But then some bad news hit. It was announced that the FIA in 1992 would require all engines to follow the Formula 1 3.5 liter engine regulations, i.e., no more rotaries. Time was well and truly running out for Mazda's star. So they made the 787. And it didn't start out very well. It had 2 DNFs and 1 20th overall finish at the 1990 24 Hours of Le Mans, so it's evolving just backwards. And even worse for Mazda, that meant there was just one more Le Mans left before new engine regulations kicked the rotary out of competition forever. So Mazda threw a blank check to make one of the greatest Le Mans cars of all time. The 13B rotary got new telescopic intake runners, 3 spark plugs per rotor, 4 rotors total, and 900 horsepower. However, this was Mazda's stroke of genius. You see, the 787B in normal racing trim redlined at 10,500 RPM. However, that burned a lot of fuel and was not as reliable in a 24-hour race. So, in order to maximize fuel economy, they limited the car to just 9,000 RPM and 700 horsepower to improve reliability and maximize fuel efficiency. In fact, the drivers even competed against each other in practice to see who could get the best MPG while still setting competitive lap times. Then, in order to build the chassis, Mazda hired the French team Oreca, and in order to manage the team, they hired 6-time Le Mans winner, Jackie Ickx. And in fact, it was Jackie Ickx who successfully lobbied the FIA to not require Mazda to fulfill the 2,200 minimum pound weight regulations, which meant that, well, it weighed just 1,800 pounds compared to everybody else in the class who had to run at 2,200 pounds. I guess you can see how the FIA thought the Mazda would fare in the race, didn't you? And their beliefs seemed to be validated when, at the 1991 Le Mans, they qualified 19th on the grid. And let's be clear, the Mercedes Sauber C11s were the clear favorites. They had the budget, the reliability, the speed, the racing success in the past, and the Michael Schumacher needed to win. And when the race began, Mercedes was expectedly leading 1-2-3. But as the race progressed, Mazda's long-con master plan began to work. Slowly but surely, the 787Bs began to slither their way up from 19th on the grid to 4th. And as the hours ticked by, the C11s began slowing down or DNFing. One by one, they fell like dominoes. And then, with just 2 hours to go, the Mercedes that had been leading since hour 6 overheated its engine, and Mazda driver Johnny Herbert suddenly found himself in the lead. And there was such little time left that Jackie Ickx asked Herbert to stay in the seat until the end of the race. And he agreed, even as his water began to run out. He did not pit and finished the race first place overall, as the first win not just for Mazda, not just for Japan, but for the rotary engine at the 24 Hours at Le Mans. After 18 years of failure, they finally got their unicorn victory. It would be the last Japanese win at Le Mans for 27 years. And sure, the new hypercar regulations will allow rotaries to compete at Le Mans again, but I have a sneaky suspicion that this will remain the only non-piston powered car to ever win at the Circuit de la Sarthe. But Herbert never got to stand on that podium. Shortly after crossing the finish line, he tried to get out of his car and collapsed from dehydration, going to the hospital. He was fine, but he won. That was arguably the high point of Mazda. Hell, maybe even Japan at Le Mans as a whole. I know Toyota won for the last 4 years straight, but they haven't exactly had much competition. This is arguably the Japanese zenith at the 24 Hours of Le Mans. And it's such a novelty. It's the ultimate underdog story. They did compete one more time with a piston-powered car, the MXR01, which was co-built with TWR. But after 1992, they left professional motorsport in favor of privateer support and one-make racing series. They also decided to focus on production cars, something that Mazdaspeed had never done. It started out pretty humbly with the Protege in 2003. They worked with Callaway Cars to develop a brand new turbocharged version of the Protege's engine, which made a nice and peppy 170 horsepower. But don't think that a 170 horsepower four-door sedan is boring, because it had a new 5-speed manual, larger front and rear roll bars, 4-wheel disc brakes, and an LSD in 2003. The Mazdaspeed Protege could handle with the best of the exotic sports cars. And to me anyway, with the front and rear aero, it looks sort of like an off-brand WRX. I actually kind of like it. But I'm definitely in the minority there, because it only lasted a single year before production was ended. So Mazdaspeed quickly rebounded and made the MX-5 Mazdaspeed, the only factory MX-5 with a turbocharger, making another 178 horsepower. But once again, the emphasis was all on handling. The internals were beefed up and had a solo body kit compared to the normal MX-5. And it was considerably faster than a normal MX-5 with a 0 to 60 time of 6.7 seconds. This was pretty quick for an MX-5, even by today's standards, which meant this one lasted a whole 2 years before its discontinuation. So Mazdaspeed didn't give up, and they released Mazda's most powerful piston-powered car ever. The Mazdaspeed 6. It had a variable all-wheel drive, 6-speed manual gearbox, and a 2.3-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder, making 274 horsepower, 280 torque. In 2006, this sub-$30,000 sedan had a top speed of 150 miles an hour. It was very good. So in typical Mazdaspeed fashion, it was canned after just 2 years. But finally, in 2007, Mazdaspeed found their footing with the Mazda 3 hatchback. They tuned it up to 263 horsepower and 280 foot-pounds of torque through the front wheels, but more importantly, they made it balanced and good to drive. And it did a sub 6 second sprint to 60 while still handling like a hot hatch. It was a great car. It was so good it actually got a second generation in 2010, officially making it the longest Mazdaspeed project in the company's history. The engine was reworked to make the same horsepower but have a smoother power band, and it got new 14.2-inch vented disc brakes, a functional hood scoop, and wider tires. Basically, it was just the same great car with improved tweaks to make it a little bit better. But all good things must come to an end, and finally, after 6 years of sale, the Mazdaspeed 3 was discontinued in 2013. And in fact, so was Mazdaspeed. Sure, they helped out with the MX-5 Cup Series, but now they're pretty much all gone. To the point where in 2016, Mazda's North American president was direct quoted, as saying, "As a brand, we are trying to elevate again a little bit more, because the execution of the Mazda MPS, or Mazdaspeed 3, or whatever you want to call it, was a bit childish." That just stings! Who woke you up on the wrong side of the bed, buddy? But that was an opinion shared by the rest of Mazda, and in 2020, Mazda confirmed that Mazdaspeed is not coming back anytime soon. Which is a shame, because they gave their country, their brand, and the engine they pride themselves on for decades the single greatest achievement at Le Mans in their history. And they made some really, really good and really underrated road cars. But I guess it's better to have loved and lost than not loved at all.